podcast family, hope you guys are having a great day, and welcome back to another episode of Design Break Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Rourke, and today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a topic that every freelancer has encountered at some point in their career: how to manage difficult communications with your clients, especially when things get a little bit tricky. Yes, we're talking about those difficult, uncomfortable conversations around things like late payments, unrealistic expectations, and especially scope creep. And because communication is such a vital part of a successful freelancing career, I felt like it deserved its own episode. But before we dive in, let's actually talk a little bit about today's hot topic, a quick little nugget of wisdom that I felt like would be a good thing to discuss today as of recording this, and that is mental health days. So back in 2021, I got a job at a startup that was very big on mental health days. In fact, I think it was second Friday of the month was a mental health day where the entire company took off the Friday and just like use it to kind of like rehabilitate themselves after a long month of work. And I always thought it was an amazing idea. I thought it was a great thing to kind of like implement. And so when I rebooted my studio back in 2022 after being laid off, I decided, you know what? In 2023, I'm going to have a mental health day every single month. And you know what? I have. We're in right now, as of the recording of this is September. Yesterday, I had a mental health day and I was able to really relax. Of course, I still did some like internal work, working on Notion and things like that. But it was something where I got to, just go out, work in the garden a little bit, go out and buy some plants for our fall, winter garden coming up and everything. And it was just a lot of fun. It like helped me kind of like decompress, going into the weekend. And I know it's something that not a lot of you out there, especially those of you who are part-time freelancers, those of you who have full-time jobs and everything like that, you guys can't really take, a mental health day every single month. But for those of you who work for yourself full-time, run your own business, consider maybe taking a singular day every single month, a Friday or a Monday, and make it your mental health day. Take it for yourself and for your sanity and everything like that. It probably was one of the best decisions I made for my business. So I just wanted to like jump in there and kind of like share that little bit of a nugget of wisdom for this week's episode. And now let's actually focus on something really fun: this week's listener of the week. And as you guys know, if you guys have been listening to the podcast for the last I think few months now, we've been trying to include a listener of the week with each regular episode. And this week, our listener is Austin Saylor. Hopefully I said your last name correctly. Austin Saylor at Full Harbor on Twitter. Thank you so much for retweeting and engaging with a lot of our posts. I do really appreciate it. And I thought it would be really fun to give you a shout out on this week's episode. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's kind of jump into the episode at hand. So today's episode is designed to be kind of like a go-to guide to navigate challenges, conversations, and situations with your clients. We're going to start, kind of discussing the importance of setting clear expectations from the get-go to prevent misunderstandings later on. Then we'll kind of delve into some of the red flags that you should make sure to kind of like pay attention to or look out for when you're dealing with your clients, and ways that you can kind of navigate that whole situation. Of course, we won't just talk about these problems. We'll provide solutions too. We'll guide you through the ins and outs of initiating and navigating difficult conversations, from preparation and emotional intelligence to effective communication techniques. And we'll wrap everything up by discussing how to close out these tricky conversations, ensuring that both parties, you and your client, are on the same page, and how to handle worst case scenarios, including breaking off professional relationships respectfully and ethically. So grab a pen and paper. You're going to probably want to take notes with today's episode, but without further ado, let's jump in and get started. So the first part of today's episode is basically setting the stage for your engagement, for your project, for your relationship with a client. And all that comes down to the first real part of it is to clarify expectations. It's vital to set clear expectations from the outset. Outline project scope, deadlines, and other key details in contracts or statements of work or any type of document to minimize misunderstandings. It's very important to do this. Basically, these documents are kind of like your guide, your rules to how you're going to navigate your project. So you can basically, if a client brings up something that is out of scope or would push out the deadline of the project, you can basically be like, well, according to our statement of work, we were going to do A, B, and C so that we can hit this specific deadline. Now you're talking about adding D, E, and F to the scope. That's going to push out the deadline, probably double it. And so this might also, or this will impact the final cost of the project as well. So you can use these documents as kind of like a way to navigate difficult conversations with your client because they agreed to this. They signed the statement of work, they signed the contract, they signed the project brief. And so because they did all that, this is a great way to kind of like give yourself a bit of a backbone when it comes to talking to your client. I don't know if that was the best analogy, but it works. So the next thing too is, making sure that you navigate unrealistic expectations. Clients who expect the impossible within limited budgets or timelines are likely to be dissatisfied no matter how well you perform. And so it's very, very important to set the stage for expectations in the beginning. Like we just said, clarifying the expectations, making sure that all the scope, the deadlines and everything are set in stone. But it's also important to watch out for unrealistic expectations. Be upfront with your client right away. If they're expecting so much to be done in a short period of time, let them know, like, this is a very tight deadline. In order for us to hit all of these things individually, then we are going to have to be on the same page. We're not going to be able to go through revisions. We're going to have to, approve things or get things approved very, very quickly. And the other thing too is that, in these situations where clients have unrealistic expectations and you don't think that you can manage those, you don't think that you can kind of like talk them out of these absurd things like, oh, I need, 50 illustrations done by the end of the week, or, oh, I need 50 illustrations done in 2 days. Then you probably don't want to work with them, period. Because if they have unrealistic expectations at the start and they're not manageable, they're not accepting of like the reality of things, they're not going to be accepting down the line. You're going to find so much issues, so many heartaches, and there's a very high probability that they're going to become a client from hell. And you don't want that. Trust me on that. You do not want a client from hell. I've had a couple. They're not good. I'm so glad I'm beyond them now. But you want to like really make sure that you watch out for stuff like this. And this kind of also lends into, the last part of this, which is transparency. Maintain open communication throughout the project, update your clients on the progress and setbacks to keep everyone on the same page. So in those situations, right, you've already managed expectations. They already know, what's going on, like how long it should take, what the scope is and everything. But if something happens, right, if they decide like, hey, we need an additional round of revision, all right, make sure to let them know like, well, if we add another round of revisions or another round of exploration, then this is going to push out the project. It could be pushing it out at least 3 days, or it could be pushing out a week. And so you want to manage, things like that. You want to make sure that you're very transparent. If you're having issues, like for instance, very recently I had a power outage. We had no power for a full day. There was no way for me to do any work. I couldn't, my laptop battery was at like 10%. My computer here, the backup power that I have associated with it, it was quickly draining. And so there was no way for us to be able to do any work that day. And so I had to communicate that with my clients. I had to be transparent, like, hey, everybody, just want to give you a heads up. We have a power outage. The power company says it's not going to be coming back on until this evening. So most likely I will not be able to get any work done today. But, we will be working hard tomorrow to get all these deadlines completed. If I need to work into the night, I will definitely do that. So being transparent with them and offering like an ability to rectify the situation is very important. So it's very important to identify red flags in working with clients. It can basically decide whether or not you work with them in the future. It can also allow you to kind of like create a mental note of, okay, this is a red flag that I had with this client in the past. If this is happening again with this client, then I need to either one, try and fix this early on, or I need to possibly see about not doing the project. It really depends on where you are in the process. If you're identifying red flags at the beginning, before you signed a contract, before you've gotten started, before you collected payment, perfect. It's easy to get out. But if you're identifying a red flag in the middle of a project, then you're probably not going to be able to get out of it very easily. So you have to figure out ways of communicating and ways of kind of like navigating these difficult conversations. So here's some of the red flags that are easy to identify. Delayed payments is the first red flag. It's very important that you don't just like, go to the client and be like, hey, haven't received your payment. Where is it? When are you going to get it to me? Go about it diplomatically, right? Let them know. And this is something that you can definitely or should definitely include in your like contracts and other documents, is that you should always have something in there that you do not start work until the initial payment is made. And so this is probably one of the best ways to navigate this, by just letting them know like, hey, we haven't received your payment. Unfortunately, we can't get started with any of the work until we receive that initial payment. Or if it's at the end of a project, this is actually usually the spot where clients tend to drag their feet, or their accounting departments, especially if you're working with a bigger company, their accounting departments might drag their feet, is with that final payment. One way to kind of navigate this, one way to kind of look at it is in my documents, I don't give them final access to files until they've made that final payment. And so this, kind of like allows you to have a little bit of a bargaining chip, and it allows you to open up discussion, hey, so-and-so, just wanted to reach out. We still haven't received the payment for the final invoice. Unfortunately, until we receive the payment, we won't be able to share the remaining final files with you. And so usually that will help to navigate those types of situations. The one thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to go super into defensive mode, or offensive mode until like it's gotten pretty bad. Generally, companies have between a net 15 and a net 30 when it comes to payment terms, and usually that will get ironed out in the contracting phase. But it's important to kind of pay attention to those things. In my contract, I usually stick to net 15. Sometimes I will go to net 30, depending on the client, depending on their policies. But that's the maximum that I go, is net 30 when it comes to payment. And generally, like if they go 15 to 30 days over the agreed upon net number, I don't know why they call them net something. It sounds weird to me, but that's what they call it. But if they go over that initial period by a certain amount of time, then they start incurring penalties. And I will actually send them updated invoices with those penalties. Now, I haven't had to do that in probably 3 or 4 years. But it is something that, I have in my back pocket in case something like that happens. But you want to try and be as civil as possible, and you want to be as nice as possible. And, sometimes what you can do is, if for some reason the client, is taking a while to get back to you, you can reach out to him like, hey, just wanted to follow up on this. It's been 30 days since the initial invoice was sent, or the final invoice was sent. We still haven't received payment. I just wanted to check in with you on that. And I wanted to see, in the meantime, would you be willing to write a testimonial for us? Or would you be willing to share some information about, how everything's going with the project? So you can also kind of like get a frame of mind into what's going on. If a client, is in turbo mode trying to get ready for a launch, unfortunately, sometimes payments and invoices, they kind of like go out the window. And so you might have to wait a little bit. It's something that you don't want to do. It's never a good situation when you're waiting for a payment from a client and they haven't gotten you what you need. So it's definitely something that you want to be aware of, and that you want to focus on quite a bit, is making sure that you get paid. The other thing, or another part of this too, another red flag, is scope creep. Now, this is something that is very important. Scope creep is something that happens a lot with projects, especially with project-based interactions or hourly-based interactions. Actually, it's more with project-based. Is that with scope creep, you have a set specific scope. Let's say, let's go back to kind of like that example I shared earlier. Your scope is A, B, and C. And now the client wants to add D into the mix. And you didn't originally scope for this part of it. It's completely going to change your timeline. It's also going to change the budget. And so in these situations, you want to be, again, as calm, as chill as possible. This is an opportunity for you to make some additional income from this project. It's a way of being able to show this client that you can pivot, that you are able to be flexible. But being flexible doesn't mean that you're going to give them what they want for free, or give them what they want in the same timeline. Sometimes, it can be a little bit wishy-washy with timelines in particular, but you never want to do free work no matter what. So in the instance of scope creep, what I generally do is I follow up with the client. I say to them, hey, just wanted to give you a heads up. Originally, like, our scope was A, B, and C. Now you want to add this D element into the scope. That's perfectly fine. We can definitely do that. We can definitely accommodate you. I will let you know that there is a possibility that the timeline will be moved out because we didn't originally scope to have D into the mix. And so that's going to push out the timeline a little bit. It's also going to increase the budget of the project. And I'll usually tell them, it's going to, take an additional, let's say, 5 hours or however long it's going to take. And so that's going to be reflected in the final invoice. And for the most part, when you come at them, like this, where you're very respectful, you list everything out, and you're very fair in the way that you talk about it, generally there's no real issue. The only issue is if they fall into the category where they want it cheap, fast, and as high quality as possible. You can't get all three of those things. And so sometimes you will run into issues with clients that they believe that everything is part of the scope that you originally talked about. And they'll see, scope creep as not an issue on their side, but in reality, it's very much a big issue. And so you want to make sure that, you handle those situations as much or as quickly and also as effectively as possible. The next one is vagueness and evasiveness. This is something that maybe a lot of you might not have a lot of experience with, or maybe you do and you just didn't realize it. So vagueness vagueness and evasiveness, basically clients who are unclear about what they want, or they dodge direct questions, can become very problematic. And so you see this a lot, especially at the beginning of a project, where a client wants you to basically solve all their problems, but they don't want to give you enough information. We've all seen those math problems, right? Those word problems in school where they give you like very much the bare minimum information. They want you to solve the problem as much as possible on your own intellect. Well, with design, with creativity, we don't do that. We're not, it's beyond our pay grade in order to be able to solve some of these problems. So we have to make sure that we have as much information as possible. So when I work with my clients, I make sure to explain to them very early on at the beginning of the project, or even before the project begins, that we will not be able to move forward on a specific task or scope item without enough relevant information. So I share a lot of questionnaires. I share a lot of documents that are designed to gather as much information as possible. I will schedule calls, even though I hate calls. I hate calls and meetings. I prefer using Loom, but I will go through and I will, have conversations with clients. I will, push clients and get as much information as possible from them. And it's very important. Like if I sense any bit of, them being vague in their responses, I, call them out. I say, I know in this specific, question here, you basically just, gave a one-word answer. I kind of need a little bit more. We need a little bit more information so that we can, do this quickly and effectively as possible. And for the most part, I've actually had a lot of clients respect me even more because I've done that. So you want to make sure that you don't allow them to be very vague. You don't allow them to be evasive, especially when it comes to gathering information. And the other thing too is if you're experiencing this even before a project begins, before you're even gathering information, and they're being vague or evasive on getting you information or paying an invoice or even just getting documents signed. Like if you're having to wait on a client or a potential client a week before they actually respond to an email, that's not good, because that will probably happen in the middle of a project, and you don't want that to happen. That's no good. That's no bueno. And then finally, the last part of like red flags is just inconsistency, and that goes back to what we were just talking about. If one day they're getting back to you very quickly and they're like sharing information very quickly, then and then the next day, next time that the communication breaks down and it takes like 2 weeks for them to get back to you, that's not good. You need to figure out what's going on. I've actually recently I had a potential project that I decided not to move forward with because of this exact red flag. The potential lead responded right away to me in my first few emails, and then when I was asking them for additional information or asking like clarifying questions to them, they then took I believe it was over a week and a half for them to get back to me. And instantly I was like, nope, that's not good. If they're going to, this is very important information for us to move forward, be able to, get them further through our sales pipeline. you know, if they took that long to get back to me and they didn't offer a reason, like that's the other thing too, is some clients will offer a reason like, hey, sorry about this. I, had a lot of stuff on my plate. We were working on, getting everything ready for the launch, gathering all this information for you from stakeholders, whole different, story. But this person then just like sent me a bulleted list, didn't even have explanations. It was just like quick 1 word, 2 word answers. I'm like, okay, you could have gotten that to me, at least 24 hours after I asked. And so it instantly, really threw up a red flag for me. So you need to be careful about things like that. So we've kind of talked about these like red flags and everything, right? Now let's actually talk about, initiating like the discussion with clients about these difficult issues, these difficult conversations. So the first thing that you want to do when before you initiate, this conversation or discussion, about these topics is preparation. So always go into difficult conversations prepared. Know the facts, be ready to present them clearly. Make sure that you've reviewed any contracts, documents, communications. So all your emails, all your Slack messages, any comments on design files and things like that. You want to make sure that you're going in prepared. You're not wanting to, go into a conversation where you're having a difficult conversation. Like, for instance, scope creep is like the perfect example for this entire section here is scope creep. Making sure that you're prepared. You've gone through, you've reviewed the statement of work that you guys signed that basically outlines A, B, C, and it doesn't include D. Show that it doesn't include it. Show that, D is probably going to take this amount of time and everything, things like that. Like making sure that you have all of that information ready to go is so important. Because for one thing, it shows them that you were prepared, that you were ready with all of these specific bullet points, and it allows them to see, okay, he's professional. He's, not coming at this, being defensive or offensive. He's coming at this, being very open. And he's making sure that he has all the information associated with him. Now, you're going to get clients that, will automatically go defensive. And so the only way that you can then go is to go offensive, and being prepared is a way of doing that. I know I'm kind of like going back and forth on some of these terms, so I do apologize for that. The next part of it too is emotional intelligence. Highlight the importance of reading the room and understanding the client's emotions. So when you go into these conversations, you will be able to kind of like read the client, especially with a lot of these difficult conversations, the ones that you're having that are like, let's say halfway through a project, or you've been able to interact with the client, you've had meetings with them, you've seen like how they, react and talk and everything. You can kind of like read their emotions off of their face on a call, or through the tone of their voice, or through how they respond to like the message, like, hey, would love to jump on a call, need to discuss, this scoping issue that we have. And so that can kind of like lead you into how you approach something. If they start to get nasty and rude, you don't want to get nasty and rude yourself. You want to be calm and collective. You want to be the bigger person in that conversation. If they start to get very nervous, or they get to, very frazzled, or they get scared, which that can happen. I've actually seen that firsthand happen. Then you don't want to get, again, nasty or rude. You don't want to go on the offensive. What you want to do is you want to, approach it like, I understand, like, when we first scoped out this project, things have changed. The needs that you guys have has changed. And so we're not coming at you like, oh, we need more money or we can't do this. We're coming to you to basically express that, hey, this wasn't in the scope. We can add it to the scope. It's just we need a little bit of give and take from your side. And just by having that conversation, being polite and thoughtful in like the way that you talk to them, it makes all the difference. It shows them that you're at a very high level of communication, of emotional intelligence, of just intelligence in general. And it really helps them, and it puts them at ease. And generally, I've had those conversations many times in the past. And when I have approached it in that manner, those clients, usually, shape up. They usually change, any types of negative things, or they're very open to change. And generally, a lot of times they actually become returning clients. They continuously come back for more and more work. And then you also want to make sure that you have a safe environment. Now, encouraging creating an environment where both parties can speak candidly, but respectfully, that's important. We're not talking about, make sure that you're in a coffee shop, or make sure that you're in some conference room with a, what's the word I'm looking for? An arbitrator, or someone that, basically is neutral to both parties. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, setting a stage, at the start of the meeting, and let them know, like, just want to let you know, I know we're possibly going to start talk about something, that's a little bit difficult. This is a safe space. It's okay to have emotions. It's okay to, possibly get frazzled and everything. We're here to help you. We're here as your partner. And so by saying that stage, and not all situations call for that, but in those conversations where, there could have been heated exchanges in Slack, or you could tell that they were a bit frazzled in the way that they talked through their email or something like that, setting the stage and letting them know, like, you're here for them. You're not here against them. You're here for them. It goes a long way overall. And so now that kind of goes into effective communication techniques. And so, we talked about, basically, initiating the discussion, or like how to prepare for it. Now let's kind of talk about the ways, of communicating, effective communication techniques with that. And so the first one is active listening. This is definitely something that in the past was very hard for me. I've said this in the past episodes, that I have undiagnosed ADHD, and listening is very difficult. My mind is very scattered. My brain is very scattered. And so when I'm talking to someone, and when I'm listening to someone, in the past, I've had to kind of retrain my brain about this. In the past, I would think about one specific item that I want to talk about, and I would just look for an opening to interject it. And I wouldn't listen to anything that they were saying. And so instead, what I do is, like, if I hear something, or like something sparks something I want to discuss, I'll quickly like write it down, or like, make a little note of it. That way I can, it's out of my mind, and I can then focus. But active listening, stress the importance of, truly understanding, the client's perspective before you respond to something. So for instance, if the client, tells you, that they're having issues where, they have a stakeholder that's breathing down their neck. The stakeholder might not be happy with, the direction that they, told you to move forward with, basically, tell them, I completely understand, stakeholders, especially if they may have been out of the loop, or they may not have been paying attention, they can quickly, cause issues. And so, I completely understand like where you're coming from with this. Then you put in like how to like change it, or how to move forward with it, right? You explain to them that you completely understand, like you show that you actually were listening to what they had to say, and you're not just there, focused on what you have to say. Hopefully that makes sense. So it's very important, instead of saying you, which, that's putting all the pressure on them, say I, or say we, or say me. right? Talk about you. Don't go in accusing, saying like, you told me to do this, you told me to do that, you did this, you didn't do that. Instead, what you do is, I understood that we were doing this, or I took what you said to mean this. And by putting I before you, that allows you to kind of set the stage that, this is your perception. This is, what you, or sorry, I understood. And so it really helps out. You don't want to go accusing people. And so including things like we statements is also very important, because then that shows, we as in the client and you or me is very important. Because so, like I could say, at the beginning of the project, we went through and we agreed upon these specific pieces in the scope. And now, I find that we need to readjust that the scope needs to readjust. So you can see here, I'm not accusing, I'm not using like you statements. I'm using I and we, so that way we show that there is a partnership and it's not like one against the other. So hopefully that makes sense. And then the other part too, and this is actually very important, this is more important for like anything in general, any type of conversations, is ask open-ended conversation. This encourages dialogue and can often lead to more amicable resolutions to these types of difficult conversations. So, asking, these open-ended questions can really help out. So, like asking, how do we move forward? Or how can we, best make sure that we don't have similar situations? Asking these very open-ended questions can really help set the stage. And it also shows that you're open to growth. You're open to continuing the work with the client. Then, we also have, closing the conversation, right? We talked about, preparing, we talked about what to do during. Now, like, how do we go about like closing these conversations? So the number one thing is, when you're going through and you're finishing up, with this difficult conversation, is to reiterate, what you discussed, and also like the agreements that you had during this conversation, this call, or the Slack communication even. Before ending any of these difficult discussions, make sure that you summarize any decisions and agreements made. It's very important. And so what I like to do is, I like to go through after a call. Sometimes I like to do it during, but it's a little bit easier to kind of get my thoughts around things if I do it after. And what I'll do is I'll list out, all right, so just to reiterate everything that we discussed on the call, here are the bullet points, here are the key takeaways, and here's how we move forward. And then I allow them, if there's anything I missed or there's anything that we need to change about this list, let me know. So I'm offering them a situation or an instance where they can, interject, or they could change something that, is outlined. But by doing that, I've set in stone, like, these are the things that we discussed that we came to agreement on, and then we can move forward on it. And this kind of like goes back to following up with the client, right? Sending them that bulleted list, sending them a summary, and also just, checking in with them. Even if it's, not just after the meeting, but throughout the rest of the project, like, hey, we had that difficult conversation a couple weeks back. I just wanted to see, how are you doing? How are you feeling about it? Do you feel like you were heard? Do you feel like that I was able to provide a solution to this issue that was amicable? Or do you feel like, there possibly is another discussion that needs to be made there? And so by doing that, you're showing them that you're focused on what they need, and focused on their like happiness throughout the project. All right. And so now we've come to kind of like the last part of this, and that is handling worst case scenarios. And really, there's only really one worst case scenario, and that is breaking off the relationship with the client. Sometimes, despite the best efforts, a professional relationship may have to end, and so there's different ways to go about this. I've done it very well, and I've done it very poorly, to say the least. I have had instances where the client was perfectly fine. They understood, everything was very amicable, very ethical. And then there's times where the client basically threatened me with lawyers and everything. And in those, the one situation that happened, nothing ever came of it. In fact, the client was so bad about getting back to me that almost a full year or over a full year went before they contacted me again. And by that time, there's nothing that we can really do at that point. And then they didn't even follow up again after that. After I said, tell you what, I will, help you with this one thing to make you happy. And as long as you can get me this information in this specific amount of time, and they never got back to me. And so there's nothing that I can do at that point. There's nothing that they can do legally because I tried to solve their problem. But the biggest thing is that with, these types of situations where if you cannot come to a resolution, then it is very important that you try to break off the relationship as nicely as possible, because you don't want them to go and badmouth you to another potential lead or client. You don't want, your reputation to go down. And so that's the one good thing is that, in a lot of contracts, we have things that protect us from that, making sure that we can't say anything bad about a client, but also that they can't say anything bad about us. And this is also where it comes in that, we have our non-refundable deposits. That way, if we have to break off a project in the middle of the whole engagement, we don't have to give a refund to them. And generally, like in these situations where I've had to break off an engagement or break off a relationship with a client, I have never asked them for any additional money. I really don't think, unless there maybe was like one or two instances years and years ago, I don't, from my current memory, I never remember having to ask them like, hey, I need, the final funds and everything like that. Generally, I just break it off clean. I offer to them like, we will, walk away, with no hard feelings to you, and hopefully you will have no hard feelings to us. Here are, some of the files. I don't give them all of the files or any final files, but I'll give them at least something that gives them a jumping off point for them working with another agency, another studio, another freelancer. And I will sometimes even offer to them. In fact, most of the times whenever I've had to break off a relationship, I will first find other freelancers or studios that could help them. And I will let them know like, hey, I've got a client here. Unfortunately, we can't, hit their specific deadline. I won't go into too much detail about it, but I'll give them at least like a reason. And I'll be like, would you be open if I sent them your way? And I'll give them a list of like 3 or 5 people to reach out to. So that way, like, I'm not leaving them in the lurch. I'm giving them opportunities to find someone who can fit their needs, who can best, provide them the services that they need. And, in those situations, there was one that we had to break off. And my main point of contact, it had nothing to do with them. They were very, very great. It just was a bad situation with their stakeholders. And a year or two later, after we broke off this engagement, they actually reached out to us. They were working at a new company, and they were like, listen, I hope there's no hard feelings between the two of us. I left that company shortly after we ended our engagement, and I would love to bring you on to this company as a freelancer. And so you can see like how ending those situations, a lot of times, again, it's not your point of contact that's the issue. It could be stakeholders. It could be just the need for your services is just too great, where they want you to work 80 hours in a week and you just can't do it. And so sometimes you have to part ways for that. And so it's always good to be amicable about that and walk away clean. So just remember that, try not to be negative, try not to be mean, try not to be nasty. Even if they get mean and nasty, be as nice as possible when it comes time to kind of like breaking off the relationship with a client. Other possible, worst case scenarios, it could be that the client, you are done with the whole engagement, or almost done, like 95% of the way through. And so there are moments where you want to get final payment, and the client is refusing to pay you and everything, but they want the design files. Don't share those design files. At that point, they are being petty. And so you don't have to share those final design files, even though you guys went through all that time, if they're not going to pay you for those. So like there's different scenarios here overall. And hopefully all of this that we've discussed in today's episode, like it resonates with you, you can take something from it, some nugget of wisdom from it. Because I know that it probably was a little bit rambling from time to time with this episode, but the hope is that the information in this whole topic can help you in the near future. So let's kind of like go through these just to reiterate some things. So for instance, setting the stage, clarifying, expectations, making sure to watch out for unrealistic expectations, and also being transparent with clients, really helps, prevent yourself from hitting these difficult conversations in the beginning, but at the same time, identifying red flags with them very quickly, delayed payments, scope creep, vagueness or evasiveness, inconsistencies, and just like anything can really help, again, prevent these types of negative or difficult conversations from the future. And it can even help, prevent you from even working with a client that could pose or could cause you to have difficult conversations. But in those situations where you have to have a difficult conversation, remember to, prepare yourself for those conversations. Remember to focus on emotional cues with clients, and also make sure to define that, in this conversation with the client, it's a safe space. There's going to be no judgment, no issues, no hassles or anything like that, that you're coming to them on equal ground as partners, because that's what you are. That's what you should be as a freelancer. And while you're having this conversation, this difficult conversation with them, be an active listener. Don't use non-accusatory language. Ask open-ended questions to make sure that everything gets resolved amicably. I am not going to try and say that again because that is such a hard word. And then with like closing the conversation, reiterating and following up with them, making sure that you're on the same page, that both parties understand everything, and also just making sure to follow up with them, after the fact, even like as the progress progresses, and making sure that, you handle the situation in the right possible way. And then in those very, very worst case scenarios, break off the relationship and be very professional and ethical in the way that you handle it. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. I enjoyed, talking about this. I enjoyed, sharing my thoughts and my own personal experiences throughout this episode. If you have any questions about this topic, please feel free to leave a comment on the video podcast on YouTube, or send us a DM at the Design Break on Twitter. Always happy to help, always happy to answer anybody's questions and share any knowledge that we might have, depending on your situation. So also remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening to it. Follow us on Twitter at The Design Break. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Rocky Rourke. We may go back to the old YouTube channel. I'm not sure yet, but we will let you know if that changes. And also one big shout out again to the listener of the week, Mr. Austin Saylor at Full Harbor on Twitter. Again, thank you so much for listening to the podcast and for interacting with us on Twitter. If you would like to become a listener of the week for Design Break Podcast, all you have to do is interact with us on Twitter, retweet, like, comment, share, DM us, or go in and leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. Those are the easiest ways to become the listener of the week. Honestly, it is very random. It is very random how we choose who becomes the listener of the week. And who knows, maybe we might have some listeners that are repeat depending on certain situations. But I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If at any point, again, you have any questions, leave a comment, send us a DM at Design Break. But that's it for me today. Always remember to stay passionate, stay positive, stay creative. That's it. Hope you have a great day, and bye.